The Friends of Keney Park recently hosted a panel discussion at the Tavern at Keney Park to celebrate its 30th anniversary. The theme was Looking Back and Looking Forward. The panelists, Henry Hester, Bill Hosley, and Charles Teale, together told stories, envisioned possibilities, and doubled down in their appreciation for North Hartford and its historic, cultural, and natural treasures. We talked about Keney Park and the life of the city and region, the legacy and influence of Frederick Law Olmsted, the Keney brothers, the Keney Clock Tower, and the possibilities for putting all this to best use in our schools. Chief Teale lamented that the schools haven't taught Hartford history since 1967. Bill Hosley spoke of the untapped potential for tourism industry to supplement the economy needed to develop and sustain what we have. Henry Hester talked about teamwork and the need to nurture a younger generation to carry the torch in the years to come, and that the Yard Goats Stadium is a positive sign that 50 years of cultural redlining may finally be at an end for Hartford's most historic neighborhood. Have a listen.
Henry Hester, the 100 Men of Color honoree, is deeply committed and was deeply committed to the health and well-being of our community and the preservation of historic sites and green pastures. Henry currently serves as Vice President of the Friends of Keney Park and is credited for helping secure $96,000 for Keney Recreation, Education, Hiking Trails Project. William Hosley is in Cultural Resource Development and Marketing. He's a historian, a preservationist, a writer, and a photographer. He's a special passion for historic North Hartford and Old North Cemetery, and we are so grateful for the work that he's done there. Everybody knows Chief Charles Teale, retired. He's a resident of the city of Hartford. He was born and raised here. He spent some of his best days of his childhood riding his bicycle through Keney Park, swimming in Keney Park, fishing for catfish in the Keney Park pond. We call this Keney Park yesterday, today, and tomorrow. At the end of the 19th century, the idea of cheap amusements for working class families became popular, and one iteration of the concept was public parks. Looking back, can you give us a snapshot of the vision of our benefactors, William Keney, Fred Olmsted, and Mr. Goodwin?
All these guys, Fred Goodwin, Henry Keney, and George Parker, they all had a passion for open space. And if you read their bio, those guys are no different than we are as far as this whole passion. Most people with passion don't make money, but they have a lot of passion about getting stuff done. And actually, they created this space to give us a place to come for therapeutic, recreation, and it's a good health benefit for all of us.
Frederick Law Olmsted, I think most you know, is born here and buried here, and if there was a fifth spot on Mount Rushmore, he would deserve to be on it because he's one of the greatest figures in American history. And he had a big idea, and that idea was that parks could be safety valves for congested cities. You know, in the time of the Civil War, these cities, we didn't really have cities. Connecticut didn't have cities. It had towns and little towns. And then all of a sudden, the railroads came and people started piling into these cities, and they were anxious about it because they said if you get too many people, there's no recreational amenities and there's no green space, that's going to have consequences that are bad. So he felt that green space were essential to public health and well-being. He also believed in parks as a civic force, places where people of different backgrounds, class, and ethnicity would rub shoulders and find common ground and solace in nature. So he really was a visionary, and I had an experience a couple years ago. My wife and I went out tonight. We're out at Yosemite, and to go to Olmsted Point, which is, Yosemite gets like 3, 4, 5 million visitors a year, and to stand at Olmsted Point and read one of those National Park Service signs that tells the story of how in the middle of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln commissioned him to draft an argument for why parks mattered and why this idea of national parks mattered. And it kind of gives you goosebumps being from here and thinking that this wasn't just a homeboy who kind of came up with a big idea. He was taking something that was in the water in Hartford and bringing it to a national and international world. So we're all grateful to him, and we've got these great parks because people like him really believed.
You get it. And the thing that I think Friends of Keney went, when we first became part, we organized as Friends of Keney, went to Boston. And when I went to Boston and I saw how they glorified Federal Law Olmsted, then I found that Federal Law Olmsted was from here. And he's at Old North Cemetery. So it's always been a piece that I always wanted to begin to highlight this guy, let him be kind of a model for young people to say what you can and what you can't do. This guy did an excellent job throughout the whole country, making green space a place that people can enjoy.
Charles, you grew up here in North Hartford, and I know that you spent some happy times in Keney Park. Tell us about your fondest memories, some of your experiences growing up.
But I got a chance to interview Mr. Swift once. He said, Love Lane is the oldest street in the city of Hartford. 103 years old. He was 103, and he worked every business day. Yes, he did, up until his 103rd, until he was 100 years old. But he said, Love Lane is the oldest street in the city of Hartford. He said, the Indians used to use it as they went from what is now known as Keney Park, when they walked down to the river. So I said, the river's way over, I'm thinking Connecticut River. And he said, there used to be a river that went through here and it went down Albany Avenue. And he said, where do you think the name Brook Street came from? Living here. The original inhabitants were the Sequin, and they lived in the north end of Hartford, and this is where they lived. This was their home. My great-grandparents used to come to Keney Park, Woods and Jack Woods from Georgia back in the 19-teens. When I was living in Bellevue Square, I used to come to Keney Park. We heard about a place called Laredo Ranch. And yeah, horseback riding. We used to take our money, and it cost $1 for, I think, an hour. I mean, 1965, it's been a few years. $1? $1 an hour. So like, I got pretty good riding my horses, and got different horses. And so now when you're horseback riding as a kid, you used to go like, sort of like this. And whoever it was that was leading the trail said, come back with that horse. I said, I don't have him, he's got me. So the day I got kidnapped by a horse from the river ranch.
Why is local history, particularly Black history, important, and as it relates to parks and green spaces and artifacts here?
A lot of people in this room and elsewhere, maybe you took a history class and memorizing a lot of dates and names didn't mean much to you, and I don't disagree. I think history really comes alive when it's close to home, when you can relate it to things you can touch and experience. So to me, local is the level that matters most, and we are so blessed here. Power and the value of history really comes down to two words: civic attachment. As I often say, you can't love a person you don't know, and it's hard to love a place you don't know. And the only way to know a place is by becoming familiar with these stories and channeling Bishop Curry now. Love really is what... I like that. It's all about love. It is. Come on. It's all about love. And if you love it, you don't hurt it.
Yes.
And you don't abuse it. And you don't steal from it.
Yeah. And
as far as Black history, I don't need to tell most people here that we've had a long history of exclusion and complicated, racial relations. This neighborhood, first they dropped an interstate highway, I-84, I call it the Great Wall of China. It separated the downtown from the north end, which nature did not mean to separate, but it did create that separation. And then in the 60s, there were riots and redlining and all kinds of difficult things. And the way you heal all that is through, again, stories and knowledge and inclusion. And I think that the beauty of all of this history is that it belongs to everyone. And the beauty of Black history is there's a lot of it, and we haven't even begun to tell it. The Johnny Rogers collection, which I have yet to see, but I trust amounts to something. We need to do something with that. I realize Hartford is smaller than Detroit and Atlanta, but over the past couple of years, I've had the good fortune to travel to places that are doing astonishing things with African American history. And probably everybody in this room knows about, maybe half of you. How many have been to the National Museum in Washington? The new African American Museum. It makes your head explode. It's so brilliant.
Yes.
To me, as a museum person, I worked in this business. It's the greatest triumph I've ever seen. It's so sophisticated and engaging. We got there at 10, and I did not see everything by 5, and I did not stop for lunch or to go to the bathroom. It's just an incredible thing. And so Hartford has a lot of that history too, and we don't need a $50 million facility to start the process of engaging people with this stuff. And if I'm a school kid, Charles Barrow and I worked a long time with Evelyn Richardson and Mike Fothergill in Old North Cemetery. And right across the street is the Sand School. That's kids. You could walk from Capitol Prep and to Old North. And Old North is just like a palace of stories. It's unbelievable. So I think that we need to do more to engage people and give them that sense of inclusion and pride that comes when you know where you come from. Louis Farrakhan speech he gave about the importance of history. And he says, a parent's greatest function is to pass on history to a young generation so that young people will be inspired by knowing what their fathers and mothers did so they can build on that, what they did, and build greater than what their parents did. And, I think Black people had their history stolen from them, their identity stolen from them by slavery. So what I've experienced over the years is my African American friends often care more about history than white people do. Privileged people do, because they know what it's like to be stripped of their history. So I'm all for it. I think you can tell.
Guys, how important is reinvestment in Keney Park, other green spaces, and historical sites in North Hartford?
When people tend to feel being part of a plan and making the plan work, I want to continue to bring in another generation, and I think we can do that by telling people that this is yours.
We haven't taught the history of the city of Hartford and the Hartford Public School System since 1967. Since 1967. And imagine, what that did for your sense of appreciation for places like this. I mean, it did it for me. I remember all kinds of stories, history lessons that were taught to me. And certainly that can be done now, and we can develop that same appreciation that my generation had for Keney Park and other parks, of course.
Well, and in terms of revitalizing the city and capitalizing on its assets, every place is known by the things that make it stand out. Like the world has become more and more homogenous. If you go to airports, you get out of the plane, every place the only difference is palm trees. Every place looks exactly the same, the chain stores. It's the unique things, the distinctive things, the authentic things that make a place stand out. And every one of them are jewels, they're precious. Hartford has $1 billion invested in cultural assets, and we have never had an adult conversation in the city about tourism. And it's not that tourism is the be-all and end-all, but it supplements the economy. Well, Hartford could be doing 3 times the visitation, and that would provide that much more resources for all the things that we love. So we've got to work on that. And the other part is not putting all your eggs in 2 or 3 baskets. We know what those baskets are, and we also know that almost none of them, until the yard goats, were in the North End. My friend Charles here talks about redlining and cultural redlining, and that's when you decide that the only things that matter are the 5 things we all know. A year ago, I helped bring a group to Hartford. They spent 4 days doing things in this area. And when we first started talking about it, they said, well, we want to do a 4-day thing, and you don't have enough. I said, we got way more than enough. And you know, the things that people know it's just the tip of the iceberg. And more recently, I was with a group from the Garden Club that has done such wonderful work for Keney Park, beautifying the entrances and whatnot. And we had a half-a-day bus trip that started right here and ended at lunch right here. And we went to Colt Park. It was a park day. We went to Colt Park, did some things in Bushnell Park. Then we went to Keney Park, the Keney Clock Tower, and then to the Old North Cemetery, which is part of the park system, and then came back here. And you couldn't have had a better day in Hartford, it seems to me. And those are things that most people, you know, don't pay a lot of attention to. So we're sitting on a gold mine, and so giddy up. I've been at this for almost 40 years, and I'm getting impatient. We need to do more.
Yeah, I think the thing that Keney Park, and I have to really give it to the way Charles Elliott laid this whole thing out. And I often see people just come in and they look at Keney Park, and they just say a lot of words. And I was talking to Charles, and I look at, you know, Richfield Street. All those streets over there, all that whole area have names. That's West Meadows. And what we want to do is continue to bring that back. I was talking to Gina McCarthy when she was here. We were beginning to make this user-friendly, where we do the GPS. And when you go over there and by Waverly, bushlands, and then get over here, it's 10 Mile Woods, but it's several areas within bushlands that Charles Elliott kind of died before he finished all this. And it's all about getting other people excited about the same thing that I know speaks for itself. So we just kind of want to lay it out a lot more user-friendly that people can do that, because I'm big on virtual tours, using our smartphones. So kids, the new generation, you know, you had something so they Google everything.
Yes, they do.
Absolutely. So history is at our fingertip. Working with UConn on the clock tower. And we're looking at trying to engineer that clock tower to get it up and working, do solar. And the engineers came in last week very excited about it, that clock tower. I really want to make that kind of a historical stop for Frederick Law Olmsted and Charles Elliott, Henry Keney, that we can actually go from floor to floor and go to people. So with the Yargos coming and another glimpse of life that's coming in North Top, I'm very excited about this city in a whole. Knowing the history and through technology, they can get it. So I think we just got to continue to push the next generation to do this stuff.
In that park, a lot more people to come in that park. I'd like to see concession stand,
Yep.
you know, public restrooms, you know, things that make the park more accessible to people, that make people think that this is a place that's safe. And in fact, it is safe. At least on set. People still say, "Oh, the park is scary." I remember when 10 decades ago, somebody said, "Oh, this park is dangerous," and I said, "When was the last time you saw something in the current? Because if it's not there, it didn't happen."
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Believe me, if something happened to Keney Park that's negative,
That
you'll
was
know about
reported.
it. That's
No.
right.
Yeah.
So
One thought, Denise, just is that people always think about building things, but events can make a difference. And I think if there were,
Yes.
you know, some creative events here, I know there are, but more. Events don't cost a lot of money. They mostly cost ideas and things that, because what a glorious space this is. That kind of, you got everything here, the kind of activities that could emanate in a place like this are almost endless.
Yeah.